This is the top 10 best Zelda games, according to IGN staff. I started watching this and I wanted to watch the rest of it. I didn't finish it. I got like to 6 or 7 before I ended it.
For 36 years, Link has been traversing the fields and ruins of Hyrule in a seemingly never-ending quest to save Princess Zelda. His journey has spanned many consoles, redefining the franchise in many ways, from its humble beginnings on the NES to the groundbreaking 3D action-adventure in Ocarina of Time.
Of course, I'll explain my opinion.
At Legend of Zelda's impressive history and game.
Also, I've not played all of these. I'm pretty sure I've probably played most of them, or an iteration of them, because some of them have been kind of remade. So, I'll talk about that too.
Bringing you the very best mainline Zelda games ranked.
So the first one, I'll be honest. So the first one I think is low. I think Twilight Princess should be higher. I think Twilight Princess is a good game. I'd say maybe
Twilight
8,
Princess gets an
8 or 9.
bad rap among Zelda fans. As the darker and edgier Zelda, it often receives unfavorable comparisons to Wind Waker, which is arguably better in comparison. But buried under all the cruft is a quality Zelda.
I think Wind Waker probably is overall a bit better, but even still, Wind Waker is an incredibly good Zelda game. Had a ton of content, so much stuff to do. So saying that is, I don't think it's fair compared to Twilight Princess.
Zelda adventure, with a large world to explore, many enjoyable side quests, and some great dungeons, the Snow Peak ruins being a highlight.
All the dungeons did feel unique.
Of Twilight Princess by far is Midna, a snarky imp who rides around on Wolf Link's back and basically trolls him for the duration of the game. She's a far more appealing companion than the pestering Navi, with her story tying.
Midna's probably one of the best side characters that Nintendo has ever made in the Legend of Zelda series. So like, what does that mean? So that discludes Link, Zelda, Ganon, any sort of Sheik characters like Impa. Those are the main ones.
Princess world and lore. She gives Twilight Princess a style all its own, a style that deserves more respect than it's been given over the years. It's not quite enough to push it into the upper level of Zelda releases. The bloat in this game is extreme, but still a quality entry with a lot to offer to the Zelda mythos.
It's not. So I had Oracle Seasons, and I didn't really care for it. That's just my opinion. It's nothing wrong with the game, but out of the 2Ds, I just didn't think it was that great. People know, I think a lot of people would disagree with me, but this is just my opinion. It wasn't my cup of tea. Also, really quick, when it comes to The Legend of Zelda, why is every single Zelda and Mario game that comes out so good? Why is that? It's because every time there's a new game, this is not the main reason, but it's one of the big ones, that every time there's a new Zelda, there's a new Mario. It feels like a new game, but it also feels like a Zelda game or a Mario game at the same time. Like Super Mario Odyssey feels like it's its own unique game, but it's you're still playing Mario. You feel like you're playing with Mario. Like using Cappy feels unique. All the unique elements that they add to it makes that game feel unique in itself. Same thing with like Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild, you can maybe debate that it's the least Zelda-y game, but it's still a Zelda game, and it's still unique in the way it incorporates new elements into the game that help make the game unique and fun without taking away from anything at all. That's just good game development right there.
Mainline Pokemon entries always come in pairs, and Zelda followed their lead with The Legend of Zelda Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages. Unlike Pokemon, however,
I got
the pair had
Seasons.
significant differences, and both were required to see the true ending of the ultimate story. These Capcom and flagship created games also varied from each other in that Seasons was more focused on combat, while Ages put a greater emphasis on the puzzles.
I remember when this game came out, I was a kid, and I went up to Washington to go see my family up there. It was my my aunt, uncle, but I went to go see my cousins because I loved hanging out with my cousins, spending time with them. You know, every time I'd go visit, they'd take me on a trip to go do stuff, but we'd also just hang out and we'd just fucking play games and shit. And it was always a good time. And one of the times I went up to go see them in Washington State, is when Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages came out. So one of my cousins who was older, I mainly hung out with two of my cousins. One was John, the other one was Jason. John was older, Jason was younger. John at this point in time was old enough to drive, so he was a teenager. He was probably 18. And I was probably 12 or so. 11, 12, I'd have to check. And my cousin Jason was, I want to say, 2 or 3 years younger than me. But he drove us to a GameStop, and we all got either Oracle, we got Seasons, or Ages.
Each game also had a unique mechanic that assisted you in solving puzzles. Seasons let Link use the Rod of Seasons to change the, season, to accomplish things like making it winter to freeze a lake that would have been impossible to cross in the summer. Ages, on the other hand, let you utilize the Harp of Ages to travel through time and enter a cave in the past that would have been inaccessible in modern time, for example. Despite it costing double to see this story to its end, it was a joy to explore both Seasons Holodrum and Ages Labrina and learn all the secrets these lands held.
The classic, okay.
The original Legend of Zelda stands as a testament to the power and allure of sprawling, vast video game worlds. It was ambitious enough to throw you right into the middle of a world infested by monsters without so much as a weapon to defend yourself.
This was probably
confident that the thrill of free roaming.
So, of course, there's going to be another game down the list, which is going to talk about how it changed games, right? We'll get into that here in a second. But it's fair for a game like this to be on here because even though this probably wasn't the greatest Zelda, this was still probably groundbreaking in its time to have a game like this. And it also, without this, you know, this is the foundation, right? So this is truly special.
Exploration would lead players to investigate, experiment, and find their own way. The Legend of Zelda cast aside linear paths and storytelling in favor of an open-ended exploration that continues to be iterated on to this day, and crammed its world full of dungeons.
Imagine going from, I know there's a time gap here in this comparison, but playing something like Pong or Tetris, and then you get to play this game where you get to run around as this guy with a sword and a different weapon of your choosing, and you just get to explore an open world. Like, that's crazy. Like, this was the start of open world games and things like that.
Dungeons and secrets that endeared itself to encouraging players into sharing tips and revelations with their friends at school. Even now, it stands the test of time as one of the best examples of giving players the freedom to find their own path, learn from mistakes, and slowly master a strange new world.
I think I know 1 and 2.
A Link Between Worlds was a pleasant surprise when it first released
I did
on
not
Nintendo
play this.
3DS in 2013. Initially dismissed as a pale copy of A Link to the Past, fans were surprised and delighted by its non-linear progression and high-quality dungeon design. Far from a mere knockoff, A Link Between Worlds turned out to be one of the tightest, most enjoyable Zelda experiences in years.
So Link to the Past is probably going to be up there, because I remember people, I was like when I was starting getting into games, I remember watching my brothers play that, and I know people hail that as one of the greatest games ever made. So I didn't ever play this. This was part of the time. There's a period in my life where I've played games almost my entire life, except for one period. It was towards the end of high school and pretty much throughout a large section of college. When I was in college and I did play games, I just played Smash Brothers, Mario Kart 64, and older games with my roommates. I didn't really buy and play too many new games then. So I did miss out on a lot of stuff. But that said, what I was getting to is I did hear this was actually very good, even though I did not play it.
As a portable entry, A Link Between Worlds tends to be overlooked when discussing the top Zelda games, which is a shame. While it's in some ways a tribute to A Link to the Past, featuring many of the beats of the original, it also stands up rather well on its own. The ability to tackle dungeons in any order hints at the direction Breath of the Wild would take a few years later, and its story is surprisingly emotional, with a wonderful reveal at the end that will delight fans.
I think Breath of the Wild
As
is
a
either going to
tribute
be one or
classic
two.
Zelda, A Link Between Worlds is a wonderful treat.
So I did play the
Legend of Zelda:
remastered
Link's
version
Awakening
from
crafts one of the
2019.
more unique stories in the
of
Legend
this.
of Zelda franchise. The world, characters, and story venture off the beaten path and succeed without relying on locations or characters like Zelda and Ganon that are typically expected to appear. We've seen 3 iterations of Link's Awakening, and each one's additions to the formula have made this entry on the list even better. The DX version included an additional dungeon that filled the world with vivid colors. The 2019 remake advanced it further with an updated art style for its
This.
characters, world, and overall visuals that energize the heartfelt moments through Link's journey like never before.
Thought they did a good job with this. I didn't actually finish it. I got really far. I was actually like to the end.
New additions like the Chamber Dungeon added replayability, allowing us to create and explore custom dungeons and share them with our friends. Link's Awakening is a testament to the franchise, with its dungeons, puzzles, and music, which became the foundation for many of the future Zelda games. It is one of the simpler games in the franchise, but the mastery of the gameplay loop and core elements of what it means to be a traditional Zelda game is what makes it special for Legend of Zelda fans.
This cannot be any lower than 5. I think anything lower than 5 for this game would have been criminal. This game was so good. The biggest complaint for this game was, well, you spend a lot of time sailing and there's a lot of travel. But pretty early on, you can learn to fast travel. And the sailing is what made it unique. What other game can you think of is where you actually, like, your method of transporting across the world was by sailing? And it did it in a nice, easy, convenient method. Changing the direction of the wind towards the direction you're going was easy. It wasn't tedious. It was very, all things considered, it was very well done.
Time has been kind to The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. Though some fans greeted its cartoony, cel-shaded style with ire after the promise of more mature takes on the franchise.
Alright, that's another thing. I remember people complaining about this. This is my philosophy and always will be my philosophy regarding graphics for games. Is this the best graphics? It's not. No. Does that matter? Not one fucking bit. Why? That's because Wind Waker had its own aesthetic and it stuck to it and it did it. It did it well. Everything matches the same design, the same look. People with big bodies, short legs, like, it didn't take away from the game, the experience. Like, it looked good. You can't find a GameCube game that actually looked better and was as crisp as this. No, it wasn't trying to do anything. It wasn't pushing the graphics limits. Granted, it was a GameCube. It wasn't capable of doing what Sony or Microsoft could do with the PlayStation or Xbox. But it didn't make a difference, because if you put it next to something, oh, it's got a different aesthetic, it still looked great. It still matches everything.
The Wind Waker's vibrant, colorful world is more widely accepted for how beautiful and unique its take on Hyrule is. Yes, there's a lot of ocean to sail around, and even with
This game also had probably some of the most content in it. There was so much shit to explore. It took forever to go through and explore every single little square of the entire map. To truly explore, get everything, do all the extra content. It was great. Great
the
game.
improvements made in the Wind Waker's Wii U re-release, the sailing around on extended hunts can weigh the experience down. But the sailing, when it often works, is a Zen-like, freeing experience that nailed the sense and feel of open adventure that Zelda has perfected so frequently throughout the franchise.
I say, so there's probably every single Zelda game has something where you could bash it for one thing. For this game, it probably was, there was the part where you're exploring and you need to get all the Triforce shards. That part did get a little tedious because it took a long time. It required a lot of rupees, and it was repetitive. Other than that, I think that's just about it. Um, everything else, all the other parts of exploring, going through the different areas, everything was so well done. Windfall Island, I just had the song up, like all the characters, the side quests here. There's so much stuff to do on this tiny little island.
Exploring new shores and not quite knowing what to expect from each new island, whether it be some great dungeons, intriguing civilizations, or something else entirely.
Koroks were
Wind Waker
great.
captures that sense of thrilling mystery with each new chapter, introducing a surprisingly dark and fascinating story that ranks amongst the best actual tales told throughout the series.
Yeah.
Add to it some familiar but solid combat that makes each hit impactful, a cast of endearing familiar and new characters, and as ever, a moving score. The Wind Waker not only nails the Zelda staples it needs to, but charts new territory in one of the series' most memorable adventures.
Okay.
Majora's Mask is most recognizable for adding a divisive 3-day.
Alright, so this is an interesting one, because when I first played Majora's Mask, I was a kid, and I was like, why the fuck am I timed? This is stupid. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. And now I have to deal with the stress of time. Like, as a kid, like, that just gave me anxiety, and I was just like, what the fuck? Like, I can't just explore openly because I'm on this fucking timer that resets every 72 fucking hours. So I played it again when I was in college. I watched a Chugga Conroy Let's Play video on it, and I watched it as I played through it, and I actually gained a massive amount of respect for this game. It was actually really good. I think if you can kind of get past the beginning and get over the anxiety of time, if you are just diligent about going through stuff and going through things, granted, I will say I think Chugga Conroy was actually extremely good at doing Let's Plays. I watched a few of his, and he was so good about pacing why he did certain things at certain times. Like, it was actually an art. And I know it sounds stupid. Does he still make YouTube videos? No, I'm actually curious. He did a great job because the pacing was good. Everything, when he did everything, at least for Majora's Mask, made perfect sense. And it was a full, pretty much 100% playthrough where you got everything, all the masks, everything, all the bottles, every single sort of collectible in the game, and everything fit perfectly in every single time fragment for when you had your 72 hours inside the game. Watching through that really made me grow an appreciation for this game and realize how actually good it was. And the fact that it was slept on, just because I think a lot of people like me originally were turned off by the fact that the 72-hour point and being timed while playing a game was a little nerve-wracking, right? That's one of the things, right? You go to play a video game as something you do to relax. And so you don't think of going to play something, especially like Mario, or in this case, Zelda, and then being on a timer for when you have to, like, have stuff done by. It was a little scary, and I was definitely stressed out playing this the first time, and it ultimately made me quit.
A time limit that you either loved or hated. It's intrinsic to the core gameplay loop, permeating throughout the world, NPC behavior, and side quests, incentivizing us to optimize and prioritize our time management to get as much done in each 3-day cycle before needing to play the Song of
Also, I didn't play no 3DS fucking bullshit version. I played the actual N64 version.
Time and restart all over again. Many of the characters and items in Majora's Mask were reused, but reworked and amplified to make them more compelling and influential than their previous appearances. Masks and other items were enhanced and placed into the forefront as centerpieces to how the story would unfold. People in the world became integral to advancing elements of the story and its subplots. Time itself and your trusty Ocarina became a necessary tool, leading to the destruction of Link and all the inhabitants of Termina if managed poorly. Majora's Mask remains one of the most somber entries in the franchise, and often deals with heavier themes such as abandonment, trauma, and death, which sets it apart from other entries in the franchise. While we may not have all loved the time limit and darker tones, it pushed the franchise forward and gave us a new perspective on the adventures of our hero of time.
It was a good story revolving around the mask. What? This is 3?
The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time tops our list of
Okay.
best Nintendo 64.
A Link to the Past, Breath of the Wild. I think this is 1 or 2, in my opinion. Granted, I never completely played through A Link to the Past. I'd still probably put it in 3, even though I never played it, just because I understand how significant it was, how much people loved it, everything. But I have played Ocarina of Time, and I have played Breath of the Wild. 2 of those are 2 of my... Skyward Sword isn't on here either.
64 games ever
All
made.
right.
So it's a testimony to the overall quality of Nintendo Zelda games that it only came in at number 3. When it launched in 1998, Ocarina of Time instantly defined what 3D adventure games would be like for decades to come. From the lock-on camera that made switching between exploration and one-on-one combat a cinch, its innovative 3D puzzles, to the way the series staples like the hookshot and bow and arrow are implemented, Ocarina of Time is rightfully remembered as the best game of its era.
I hate how they use this
Nintendo 64
gameplay.
games haven't always aged
Show
gracefully
me the
given the
N64.
hardware limitations of its day, but Ocarina of Time remains incredibly playable and engrossing to this day. Whether you're talking about the original classic or its tweaked and improved 3DS remake, Ocarina of Time will always remain the definitive Zelda experience to date for many fans. It took everything that worked in A Link to the Past and near flawlessly translated it to a 3-dimensional realm. Which brings us to the game that narrowed...
Okay. So that's why I think this game, Ocarina of Time, even though they're showing this shitty fucking 3DS bullshit version again, not the original N64 version, which is better, I'm not gonna lie, I hate the way the graphics look for this. Maybe it's just the boomer in me, because it's like, this isn't not my Ocarina of Time. The same way that Legend of Zelda changed open world games and free exploration, that's what Ocarina of Time did in a 3D world. 2 of the greatest games I think that have ever been made, and they came around the same time and on the same console. Super Mario 64, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Those are probably two of the biggest classics in all of gaming history. And they are both N64 games that came out around the same time. I couldn't tell you exactly when, I'm not sure. But it's because they did an open world game in 3D. And it changed everything. It set the new precedent in how games were made from then on. Just how like how The Legend of Zelda was, having an open world game where you can explore, even though it's 2D, was groundbreaking. This was the next step up, which separated it. So having something like this, I think B number 3 is a bit criminal. Not to also mention, I know of 2 games off the top of my head that IGN has given a perfect 10 out of 10. They've done it a few times, and they've been criticized for it. They say people are too lenient to give them out. But there's 2 games. One is Ocarina of Time. And 2, Skyward Sword. That one, Skyward Sword's a very good game. Is it perfect? No. Is it the best Zelda game ever? No. Does it deserve to be on this list? I think so. So, the fact that this is 3, which means
Early
Breath of the
beat out
Wild...
Ocarina of Time for our panel of Zelda rankers.
Okay.
Building off the vast top-down world of The Legend of Zelda's Hyrule, A Link to the Past refined the scope by trading in a freeform adventure for an engaging storyline, a dense and populated world, and the grand reveal of an equally sprawling mirror dimension that was the Dark World. It's a masterclass in adventure and game design,
Yeah.
with an impeccably paced grand story and a huge variety of puzzle-filled dungeons lured over by some of the most imposing bosses in the series.
I remember watching my brothers play this.
With its rip-soaring soundtrack and beautiful sprite graphics,
This is
A Link to
speedrun
the
killer
Past was a
boss right
perfect
there.
package to immerse yourself in the land of Hyrule, featuring tons of quirky characters to help out, as well as secrets and heart pieces hiding in almost every screen. Each new item gained on your adventure practically begged to be experimented with to find new applications and delving through its expertly crafted dungeons or uncovering new areas on the overworld map. Even all these years later, you'll be hard-pressed to find a more quintessential Zelda experience.
I think I put that at 3.
The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild reinvented a 30-year-old series in a way we rarely see. After Skyward Sword offered a slightly more linear, story-driven campaign than most fans were used to, Breath of the Wild readjusted dramatically in the opposite direction. Suddenly, you could go anywhere and climb anything in any order you wanted. And goodness gracious, there was a lot to choose from.
I'll wait till this is over, till I talk about Breath of the Wild.
There are plenty of fair criticisms to throw at Breath of the Wild, with common ones being around the lack of Zelda's traditional dungeons and items. But what's truly impressive is how much it maintained the heart of a Zelda game, even as it altered nearly every system around it. To a certain extent, Zelda has always been about exploration and choice, and Breath of the Wild simply leaned into.
This was there's not a Zelda game that is better at exploring than Breath of the Wild, and I don't even think that's up for debate. Maybe A Link to the Past, but I think this is still exploring every detail up and down of Hyrule and Breath of the Wild was unlike anything else. It was incredible. It made it. This was my old roommate. Guy I was living with before for the past few years. He and I got Breath of the Wild at the same time. We both bought Switches. We both bought Breath of the Wild when they came out because we wanted to play it. He and I played the fucking shit out of it when it first came out, and we were in love with it. He and I both agreed if there was a game that we could go through and play again for the first time, just completely wipe my memory and just play it again, it'd probably be Breath of the Wild. I don't know if I still feel that way now. I think I could. It's still in that conversation, but there's few other games I would consider throwing in that category now.
And enable those aspects of itself above all else, now making the world a place that would react to those choices as well. There's just so much to see, so many people to meet, and secrets to find hidden throughout this long-since devastated version of Hyrule.
Yeah.
But while the options available to you are enormous in scale, there's a subtle restraint at play here as well, with Nintendo refraining from cramming your minimap full of markers and waypoints that so many other games do. Indeed, Breath of the Wild didn't just reinvent Zelda in this way, it shook up the entire open-world adventure genre by empowering you to make your own moments rather than giving you an exhaustive checklist to methodically go down. No one is telling you to climb that one particular hill in the distance, but if you want to do so, you better believe a Korok will be waiting there to reward you for your effort. There's always been a bit of a distinction between 2D and 3D Zelda games, but Breath of the Wild and its successors may end up defining a third category for the series going forward. Whether or not you prefer the more structured nature of the mainline games before it, the impact Breath of the Wild has had on both Zelda itself and the industry as a whole is undeniable. And the endless slew of magical, natural discoveries it provides makes it easy to see why.
Alright, so
And there you have it, our picks for the
I think Skyward Sword deserves to be on this list. Because Skyward Sword, even though it's not perfect, had the most unique combat experience in a Zelda game ever. Where, like, how you actually swing your sword and react was truly unique. And I think Skyward Sword had, like, some of the coolest boss fights, especially towards the end of the game, like the very end of the game. The final bosses. Skyward Sword also had some terrible bosses, and it also had, I think, a pretty tedious sections of the game, which we have, I think, coming up here pretty soon after we finish our third dungeon. That said, I still think Skyward Sword is a great game. There's a ton of content in it. The combat is, I think, up there. The thing about the combat for Skyward Sword is it's because it's not perfect, but at times it is challenging. And there's never a boss fight in other Zelda games where I'm like, holy fuck, this is actually hard. Like the biggest bash on all of the Zelda games that I can make generalized is that Zelda games honestly aren't hard. If you're a career gamer, if you're somebody such as myself who's been playing games for practically over the entire course of my 30 years on this planet, I've never really struggled in a Zelda game once. The biggest thing you'll struggle with at times is probably a puzzle. But there's never going to be a fight where you're like, holy fuck, I can't beat this guy. And that really actually also makes me wish that Zelda would put in a type of super boss type enemy. That said, I don't expect it to happen because Nintendo isn't one to really push hard content, because Nintendo's philosophy has always been for everybody. And they want to have everything access to everyone. They don't want to gatekeep any content, which I get. But having something like a Millennia in like a Breath of the Wild 2 would be so cool. It'd be so awesome. Give me a boss where I need to stock up on fucking all these weapons, assuming it's the same mechanics, right? We still have durability, we still have all the same stuff, where I need to go through all my fucking gear in order to beat this boss. Like, that would be so sick to do that. But, alright, kind of going back though. Breath of the Wild isn't like, I think the biggest steps have been The Legend of Zelda and then Ocarina of Time. Because it changed things for 3D, from open world and then 3D. I think the next biggest step is probably Breath of the Wild. Because Breath of the Wild changed open world to make it even, it showed what's even capable of making it even greater and expanding the possibilities of it. The fact of the matter is, people, oh, well, the durability system sucked. Yeah, it got annoying at times, right? You have to actually be careful and stuff. You can't just, you know, run around forever. Like, you actually have to explore. You actually have to be diligent about how you're managing your stuff, your gear. But so many other games don't exist, probably, without Breath of the Wild. One of the games that doesn't exist without Breath of the Wild is Genshin Impact. I remember when I first started playing Genshin, I was like, oh, this game's got some hype to it. Alright, people played the beta, it has good things about it, looks cool. Don't know anything about gacha, any of that bullshit. Literally no idea what I was in store for. But Genshin, the way the movement and the world works is literally copy and pasted straight out of Breath of the Wild. The stamina system, sprinting, climbing, literally copy and pasted directly from Breath of the Wild. So all the Genshin fanboys and fangirls that are in love with the game and continue to just shill out money to MiHoYo for their next 5-star character that they want on their banner, you can thank Nintendo and the Zelda Breath of the Wild for that. Because that's essentially your base and your core comes from this game. I don't think Elden Ring's world exploration would be as good if it weren't for Breath of the Wild. I think From Software took a lot of notes and learned from Breath of the Wild, and they used those to incorporate it, use it, and apply it to the Dark Souls universe. And they did a phenomenal job, because I think you could debate whether Elden Ring's exploration and exploring the world is better or as good as Breath of the Wild's. I mean, I put 100+ hours in my first playthrough of Elden Ring, and there was still stuff I missed. I tried to do damn near everything, and there were still things I missed. There's so much shit to explore. I think a lot of these games don't happen, or we are not where we're at. We don't get Elden Ring, we don't get Genshin Impact without Breath of the Wild. I think that's just facts. Alright, I'm gonna do really fast. Top 10 Zelda games. Alright, the homer in me, I'm gonna put Ocarina of Time. I probably don't feel the way I do about games if it weren't for this game. It's one of my favorite games growing up. I literally did everything in my... This is the first game I truly wanted to do everything and explore everything. The only thing I didn't do was get all the gold Skulltulas in my first ever playthrough. I got everything else. Everything. All the hearts, all the bottles, Bigoron, everything else except for that. 2, I'll put Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild is an incredible game. Like I said, it set the next level for 3D open world exploration. A Link to the Past. Like I said, I never did play it, but even still, I understand just how special it was and what it did. Oracle of Seasons and Ages was only the 7th Zelda game to come out. That's wild. Wind Waker. Wind Waker's incredible. It's special. It's unique. I put it there. I'm realizing looking at these games, essentially anything that was on a handheld within the last few years, I did not play. I think I've played every single 3D Zelda game, but there's quite a few 2Ds I haven't played. I put Skyward Sword here. Ooh. Do I put Skyward Sword in front of Twilight Princess? I think I do. Twilight Princess was a good game, but it didn't do anything truly unique. The most unique thing about Twilight Princess was having Wolf Link. Furries get to celebrate, but I put Twilight Princess at 6 because I'm just now realizing there's not very many other games here on this list I'll put in front of it. We'll put The Legend of Zelda. There. Then I think we'll go Link's Awakening. Honestly, I feel like the best way to rate these games is play the original versions of them and play them all back to back to back to back. Because looking at the list and thinking about this list that IGN did, they don't have it listed. Minish Cap is currently underrated and deserves a remake. Up to Zelda games list, you know how to get us to click, don't you? Majora's Mask is my favorite. I like the... Oh, fuck. I'm forgetting Majora's Mask. I'll put Majora's Mask. Man, I don't want to feel like I'm biased and just throw all the 3Ds in front of everything else. Fuck, see, now I'm wondering if there's recency bias. That's why I'm saying this list is hard to do. Because I feel like if I did this at a different time, I'd have different answers. Finally, I'm gonna put Minish Cap at 10. I'll put Minish Cap over Oracle of Seasons or Oracle of Ages. Minish Cap's a good game. That's actually pretty good. I haven't played that game in a long, long time. Alright, but with that, that's my list. I think that's pretty fair, all things considered. I will admit that that can definitely be switched. Like I said, I think it's a very easy game to have some recency bias in, so I get that. But with that, let's get into some Skyward Sword.